can tell you the exact second the floor tilted. It was a Monday morning that smelled like bleach and burnt coffee, a week before the medical board was set to vote on our center's application for designation. I was in my office at Front Range Medical Center, the brown building that tries to look friendlier than it is with art prints of aspens in the hallways, when our communications director knocked once and came in already apologizing. "You're trending," she said, and set her tablet down like a doctor delivering a difficult lab result. An article from a local health outlet filled the screen. Competitive center launches innovative patient routing protocol. Pilot shows promising outcomes. I scanned the piece. It quoted documents reviewed by our newsroom, and then there they were, phrases I knew, the way you know your own signature, acuity-weighted queuing, diversion threshold override, callback cohort. The paragraphs were skeletons wearing my words. If you've ever felt a paper cut and watched the red come before the pain, you know that moment. My throat went dry. The body's oldest alarm. I'd spent the last year building a routing method to keep our emergency department from repeating the same failures, low acuity patients waiting 6 hours while high acuity patients stacked up like planes circling without fuel. It combined EHR triggers and a human override to stop the worst choke points. It wasn't sexy, but it worked. We had the numbers to prove it. We'd been careful too. Everything was under restricted access on SharePoint. The drafts had watermarks with my initials and a timestamp. "Tell me this is a prank," I said. "It's live," she said, "and it's getting picked up." By noon, my phone had two personalities. One was colleagues saying, "This must be a mistake." The other was more careful. "We need to talk." By 2, I was pulled into a conference room where the light is always either too much or not enough. The chief medical officer, Dr. Patel, sat across from legal and our chief operating officer, who has a polite smile that never reaches his eyes. "We'll investigate the leak," legal said, "but you should know the board will ask how these materials left your team." It would have been easier if someone had raised their voice. Instead, the room did something I recognize from psychology textbooks we show our residents: cognitive dissonance wrapped in bureaucracy. Everyone says they believe you. Nobody wants to be the last person to be fooled. I walked out and texted my wife, Tessa. She ran administration for one of our clinical clusters: oncology, cardiology, pulmonary, a constellation that required a steady hand and an appetite for politics. We met at this hospital 8 years ago. We married 4 years later because no one else made a hard day feel like a solvable problem. We learned to talk in shorthand, two people juggling grants, committees, and medicine's infinite hunger for forms. "Can you talk?" I typed. "Meet at the atrium?" She replied fast. "Can't. Vendor dinner. Back late. Love you." Vendor dinner. The phrase landed in my gut like a weight. For the last month, vendor dinners had been a regular thing for her. She'd become friendly with a regional rep from a pharma company that wanted placement in our order sets. She called him my logistics guy because it felt more neutral. His name was Ryan. I met him once in a hallway. Clean haircut. Watch too nice for his job. He smiled like a man who practices. I told myself this was how influence looks when you cover it with lanyards. I went home that night to a house that still had our wedding photo on the mantle. We look absurdly happy in that picture, two people who think they can outrun time by smiling hard. I made pasta, not because I was hungry, but because the boiling could stand in for thinking. Tessa texted at 9:12 p.m., running late. "Don't wait up." I stared at the words like I could wring anything else out of them. When she came in after 11, she smelled like the hotel bar by the hospital. Rye and citrus, and something I didn't recognize. His cologne, new to me, now in my kitchen. "How bad is it?" she asked, toeing off her shoes. "Bad enough that my credibility is a piñata," I said. I tried to keep my voice light because I didn't want to put it on her. "Bad enough that they used phrases from the protocol." "How could they get it?" she asked, moving like a person who needs motion to be convincing. "That's the question." I said. Everything was locked down. She poured water, the way she always did when she wanted to calm herself without letting me do it for her. You'll fix it, she said. You always do. I slept the way you do when your brain is a room with a light you can't find. The next morning, HR sent a note with the subject line, administrative leave. It was worded like a lullaby, pending completion of the internal inquiry, with pay. Thank you for your cooperation. I read it 3 times and found nothing that felt like me. I'm a builder. When the world takes away my tools, I look for different ones. I drove to campus even though my badge would probably turn red at the door, and sat in my car with a legal pad because paper felt like a kind of weapon no one could quarantine. My friend Maya runs our InfoSec team. She has the calm of someone who deals with fear for a living and refuses to catch it. I texted her and asked for 5 minutes, and she said to meet her at the coffee stand near radiology because nobody thinks a person sipping a latte is engaged in a rescue. I can't give you anything that interferes with the internal process, she said as a preamble, then dropped her voice. But I can tell you, there's always an audit trail. Cloud services don't forget. You're not crazy. I need to see who touched the files, I said. She nodded toward her office. I'm not here, she said, and walked away. I stared at a screen I knew better than my own hands, SharePoint's version history, the once boring list that now looked like a crime scene with polite timestamps. There were 3 files that mattered: Protocol V7, Rationale V3, and Board Deck Draft. I watched their lives unspool, edits at 11,012 p.m., a view at 2006 a.m., a download at 6,041 a.m. The access logs attached to our Active Directory had usernames and device IDs. One line made me lean closer, as if proximity could change it. Tgrant, FRMC accessed at 10:54 p.m. from a device labeled FRMC LT422. That's Tessa's account. I know because I helped her pick a password she wouldn't forget. The login came from the admin building. The system showed a badge swipe into level 2 at 10,000, 70,000 and 1,200 and 1,000. I walked to the balcony that overlooks the ambulance bay. The air smelled like exhaust and weather. I could feel the textbook lines forming in my head again. When a person you love does something that breaks your world, your brain tries to file it where the least damage will happen. It calls it a misunderstanding. It calls it a coincidence. It finds names for it that aren't betrayal. My phone buzzed. A text from Tessa. Lunch? I typed back a single word. Atrium. We met where the atrium tries to be a park, with its tall windows and plants that don't need sunlight to pretend. She wore the black blazer she always wore when she wanted to be called director. She sat with her hands flat on the table like a person about to be sworn in. Legal says you'll be fine, she said. Do they? I said. This hospital can't afford to lose you, she said. It's optics. They have to show they're serious. I could have shown her the screenshot then, the line with her username and the time that matched her late-night text, but I didn't. Part of me wanted to hear another explanation because the part of me that loved her wasn't dead yet. It was bruised and breathing shallow, but it was stubborn. Who were you with last night? I asked. Vendor dinner, she said. With Ryan? Among others, she said. Where? Hilton by the hospital, she said. What room? I asked, and watched her blink at the bluntness of a question that refused to put on makeup. That isn't fair, she said. You don't trust me. I used to, I said. Her face did a thing I know well. Micro-shock, rapid repair. He's a colleague, she said. He has influence. We need his cooperation to get the formulary updated, to get the supplies moving. I'm doing my job. And I'm doing mine, I said. Mine involves safeguarding intellectual property. We sat in the atrium pretending to be 2 people who could talk through this while families passed with balloons and tired eyes. At some point, she reached across the table and touched my wrist. The same wrist she touched when we signed the mortgage, and she said, "We're in it together." My skin remembered that, and my brain pushed back. That evening, I went to the archive room we still keep because medicine is addicted to paper. It has the smell of old glue and climate control. I pulled a binder I didn't think anyone else knew existed. My handwritten notes from the first weeks we piloted the method. I had been careful with the math and sloppy with the handwriting. I took a photo of one page where the words I'd made up lived before they had a home. If anyone called me a thief again, I wanted to put my sloppy ink next to their printed PR and let people decide which looked like a lie. The internal inquiry moved like an iceberg, silent, heavy, entirely indifferent to the people it carves underneath. They set up interviews. They asked me to sit in a room with a camera that blinked like a metronome and to tell them stories that had to fit in the lines on a form. They asked for my devices. I handed over my laptop and phone because innocence shouldn't need a shield. 3 days later, the medical board convened. The room was beige on purpose. The people were not. They let me present my work, but the air around me was already contaminated by the article. One of the members, a man who made a career out of calling himself rigorous, asked me to explain the similarities in language. I told him I had also noticed similarities, and that plagiarism sometimes runs downhill from the original. He didn't smile. "We need to be sure this is your work," he said. "The kind of sentence that can be a scalpel or a sledgehammer depending on where you hold it." I showed our outcome data. I showed the handwritten page. I showed the EHR timestamps that lined up with our pilot days. He nodded. He said, "We'll take this under advisement." The phrase means we're not brave enough to decide with you in the room. That afternoon, HR called. The leave was no longer pending. It was official. "Please turn in your badge." I sat in my car in the garage and watched a family try to find where they'd parked, the father clicking the fob in small, hopeful bursts. If you have ever been very tired, you know the particular grief of small hope. I texted Maya. "Meet?" She said, 2 minutes, level 3. We met beside a column where the paint is always rubbed off by cars that misjudge themselves. "I can't just hand you a case," she said. "But I can tell you this. The access to your files came from an administrative account the night of your wife's vendor dinner." "I saw the log," I said. "There's more," she said, and I could tell she was speaking in the spaces between her sentences. "There was an external login the next morning from a device that wasn't ours. The file names were opened. Then a compressed file left our network. It took 14 seconds. That's fast. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were taking." The word external turned my stomach. "IP?" I asked. She nodded. "Hotel network," she said. "Guess which one?" I put my head against the cool concrete. If you've ever studied rationalization, you know what comes next. The mind lines up reasons to make the painful thing less painful. She didn't know. Someone borrowed her badge. She was careless, not complicit. But the audit trail is a ruthless narrator. It doesn't care how generous you are. I texted Tessa. "Where are you?" She replied, "Late meeting." "Don't wait up." My fingers typed before the better angels could gather. "Meet me at the garage. Now." We met on level 2, where the light makes everyone look a little haunted. She walked toward me in that blazer, a woman rehearsed. I held up my phone with the screenshot, the timestamp, the device ID. It felt like I was showing her an autopsy photo of something she'd insisted was alive. "What is this?" I asked. She looked at the screen long enough to decide on a story. "I was looking for your board deck," she said. "I wanted to help." "You downloaded it to a hotel network and sent a compressed file out," I said. I kept my voice quiet because rage would have been a relief, and I didn't trust relief. "To who?" No answer. "Ryan?" I asked. She stared past me at the numbered spaces. People walked to their cars and didn't hear the thing breaking 2 feet from them. I wanted the center to win, she said. We needed the grant. We needed the status. I thought if they saw that another site was doing it, they would be too careful to reject us because then it would look political. Or they'd force a collaboration. You wanted us to win by losing, I said. By making me look like I stole my own work. She put a hand on the car next to her as if she needed something solid. I didn't think it would come back like this, she said. That sentence is an epitaph on 1,000 bad decisions. You didn't think, I said. That's the sentence. I did it for us, she said, the oldest rationalization in the world. I wanted us to win together, I said. This is not together. She opened her mouth and closed it again. For once, there was no spreadsheet in her eyes, no flowchart of words that would end in maybe. She looked like a person finally out of scripts. How long? I asked. I didn't mean how long with the files. I meant how long with him. She didn't answer that either. What happens next in stories like this is always the same and always different. There's the administrative side, the part with forms and signatures and statements on letterhead. There's the private side, the part that smells like someone else's cologne in your house. Both were waiting. Maya's team turned over their findings to legal. Legal turned them over to the board. The board turned their attention to our competitor and the pharma rep because it turned out that files don't just leak, they are carried with purpose. Funding ties came into view. Emails with phrases like strategic alignment began to look less like planning and more like bribery in business casual. The state opened an inquiry into the company's conduct. The rep, Ryan, lost his job in a very formal way and his license in a way that looked informal but wasn't. Our hospital issued a public statement about the source of the leak without naming me, because institutions always talk in the passive voice when they're ashamed. They sent an internal letter that used my name and the word apologize in the same paragraph. The COO found me in a conference room and said, "We were wrong." I nodded because I was too tired to play magnanimous. Tessa requested unpaid leave. The Administrators' Council met and voted. They used phrases like confidence and integrity and voted her out. She sent me a text that said, "I never meant to hurt you," as if intention were a scale that could weigh harm and make it lighter. I didn't reply. Between us hung a parking garage that would never stop echoing that one conversation. When the grant committee finally voted 2 months later, they did it fast, like there had never been a question. The method was adopted. The pilot scaled. The outcomes repeated. Patients waited less. The diversion alarms blinked less. It should have felt like a parade. It felt like a quiet door closing on a room I'd slept in too long. I walked the corridor where people had stopped meeting my eyes. They met them now. Some said, "Good to have you back." Some said nothing and smiled small. The kind of smile people give you when they're sorry they didn't speak up sooner. I took it all without ceremony. I'm not interested in winning the argument after I've already lost the sleep. I didn't go home. I went to a law office with glass walls and a plant that didn't need me. The receptionist said my name and offered water. My attorney shook my hand and looked at me with the calm you need to rent at a time like this. We went over the forms. We went over accounts, the house, the cars. We went over timelines because the law likes its stories in order even when life does not. When I signed, my hand didn't shake. If you have ever drawn a boundary and kept it, you know the relief is quiet. It doesn't need applause. It needs sleep. I slept for 10 hours that night and dreamed of a different version of us. Two people in different jobs who never learned how to turn a boardroom into a church. In the morning, I made oatmeal and took the long way to work so I could drive without remembering which lane she favors. Tessa wrote once, a month later. It was a short message that said, "I'm sorry," and then a longer one that explained again the rational math of her choice. She believed the ends protected the means. She believed a collaboration might have been forced. She believed in her ability to steer a fire. I read it and felt neither triumph nor pity, just the kind of tired you earn. I wrote back, I hope you heal. That wasn't forgiveness for what she did. That was me choosing what I wasn't going to carry. The method launched in full by winter. Nurses who'd thought I was a fool sent me messages of relief at 2 a.m. because that's when the ED either loves you or curses you. A paramedic shook my hand in the ambulance bay and said, "Whatever you did, it helps," which is the best peer review I've ever received. I put that sentence in my pocket and took it out when the nights got thin. I've read enough about betrayal trauma to know why my brain replayed the audit log like a song with one bad chorus. Hypervigilance is what psychologists call it when your body checks locks that never existed before. It fades. It faded for me. What stayed wasn't fear. It was a clarity I wish I'd had sooner. Compassion is a virtue until someone sets it on fire and tells you it's a candle. I don't think of Tessa as a villain. I think of her as a person who let ambition climb into the passenger seat and touch the wheel. I won't scrub the house of her memory like a crime scene. We built good things together. We broke this one. Two truths can live in the same room and not fight if you let them. When I walk past the atrium now, I look at the families and think about all the ways we try to make hard things look softer. We build gardens indoors. We frame art. We write policy. Sometimes what we need is an audit trail that tells the truth. Sometimes we need to look at the line with our name on it and say, "This is where I held it. This is where I dropped it. This is where I picked it back up." A week after the grant announcement, I found myself in the garage again, level 2, watching people search for their cars. A resident hurried past reading a note on her phone. A janitor tied a bag and smiled at me like we shared a secret. I went to my car and sat without turning the key, listening to the massive building inhale and exhale. For a second, I thought about the version of my life where I swallow it and stay. Then I put my hand on the wheel and it felt like home, and I drove to sign the last paper. I don't know what justice looks like to you. To me, it looks like a quiet corridor and a head-held level. It looks like a method launched without a footnote about theft. It looks like a man leaving his own house and walking back into himself. It looks like the line in an audit log where your name is attached to a file that bears the mark of your work, not anyone else's, not anymore. 2 questions for you before I go. If someone you love says, "I did it for us," but the us breaks in their hand, where do you set your line? And when the truth finally arrives with its boring timestamps and its unglamorous facts, do you let it end the story, or do you hold out for a prettier lie? If this story made you think or gave you back a piece of your voice, stay with me, leave a comment, and subscribe.